Well, we are getting close to 5 after, so I want us to get underway here. So let's see here. Welcome everybody to the Technical Advisory Council meeting of the Confidential Computing Consortium. We have the date on here correct. Today is January 25th, 2024.
It's correct. For at least most of us on the call.
Yes, I will not try to think about the international dateline right now. So we're here to help promote the adoption of confidential computing through open collaboration. Everybody is welcome to contribute here, whether you are a premier member, a general member, or just somebody from the community. If you would like to know more about our contribution standards, you can find our code of conduct in any of the repos for confidential computing consortium projects. We also abide by the Linux Foundation's antitrust policy, and you can read more about that at linuxfoundation.org/antitrust-policy. So for today, we'll do a quick recap of what we covered in the last meeting, and then we'll get into the topics for today, which include our priorities for 2024, the RFI responses that I think we've got, that Mike was just saying that we've got a few more hours to make adjustments to. And then we've also gotten some of the projects through the final stages of onboarding, and others are still earlier in that process. And we'll want to talk about anything we can do to assist them. And then we'll round out the meeting by talking about next session. Were there any other topics that were expected for today that are not listed? Okay, so with that, we typically do roll call, but I'm going to skip over roll call, I think, on a regular basis, because we can always check for quorum when and if we are going to do a vote. And we can save a little bit of time by avoiding that verbal formality. But we don't want to skip over the opportunity to invite new people into the community. So if you're on the call and you have not introduced yourself at least twice in a prior meeting, let us know where you are coming from, either physically or corporately, what your name, your pronouns, and what your interest is in confidential computing. And you can feel free to just pop off of mute. Taking a quick scan at the list today. I think I recognize everybody as a previous participant. Oh, and we are graced with Steve Wally today. Welcome, Steve.
Ooh.
Okay. So into old business. Last session, we talked about the recent changes to the Linux kernel ADI for generating attestations. And we talked about a kernel SIG that we are spinning up that is meant to facilitate those kinds of discussions in the future. So where in your company you have work that might depend on the kernel, but you don't necessarily have there might be some separation between kernel maintainers. You don't have kernel maintainers. That's not something that you've been tracking. One of the points of this SIG is to bring those two groups together. Dan Williams has been assembling a collection of people who work in the confidential computing parts of the kernel. And we're working on getting together the architects and other stakeholders from vendors and adopters that aren't normally part of those conversations, and we're going to try to bring everybody together so that we can accelerate the rate that we get patches through the kernel.
Dan, is it worth noting that it's not just necessarily maintainers, it's anyone who's a kernel hacker, basically, who's involved at this sort of level, right?
Yeah, I'm using the term maintainer pretty loosely, I guess. So yes, that's a better term.
I don't want to scare anyone off, that's all.
Yeah, and in fact, the intent is definitely that for anybody who for whatever reason, isn't able to engage with the kernel or doesn't engage with the kernel, we want this to be a friendly environment where you can come in knowing nothing about the kernel, but have informed opinions about confidential computing and APIs, and make sure that kernel maintainers actually understand, oh, this is how the API will be used, and it will make for a better experience. Second thing we talked about last time was getting to friendlier meeting time for our colleagues in Asia. And there is a poll out that Sal sent, I think it was earlier this week or late last week. So people should have received that. Sal, is there anything that you would like to say about that?
Yeah, I'm just bringing up the current results real quick. And apologies, I am in a loud cafe, but there's a Finos event right after this on Monday. So currently we've got 24 responses, and it's pretty much that everyone's first choice, 50% of people's first choice is to leave it at the current time, 3 p.m. And then 34% are asking for the 12 a.m. GMT, which is really supporting PST time zones. What's kind of convenient and interesting is that we've got to vote for those very disparate times. And then 43% of the people's second choice is 9 a.m. GMT. So we may be able to find a time that works well across those, but I will send those responses out. It's been about a week and we have 24 responses. I'm happy to close this. I think this was representative.
Great. Okay, moving on to the next thing, we'll talk more about the NIST RFI responses, but we reintroduced those last time so that people had notification to add contributions. And then we also touched on our ability to mentor projects. So not to be confused with, we have mentoring programs for internships to bring new people into the community, but in order to help our projects mature, historically, each of the TAC members has been associated with one of the projects. And we were looking at, as we continue to scale the number of projects, whether we would be able to maintain that level of engagement from TAC mentors. We didn't reach any decisions on that, but had some discussion. So getting into today, over the last week, Lily, working with Ben and others, has put together a mailing list for our project maintainers, or how we designated it here as project leads. So each one of the consortium's projects will have designated one or two of their maintainers, and then we've got a connection point with them. We want to keep the signal to noise ratio very high on this list. So we're going to reserve this for things that need action across the projects, or the projects need to be aware of. And so it's separated out from the TAC list so that we can have our regular discussions on the TAC mailing list for governance and compliance and all the other things that we talk about. But where we need to reach project leaders, we now have a more organized mechanism than in the past. This should also take some, this will also help the project mentoring be a little bit more directed. In the past, some of the project mentoring time had gone into message passing between the TAC and the projects, and that's probably not the most effective use of that mentoring role. So this will hopefully resolve some of that. Any questions on the project leads mail list? So if you're associated with a project and they are not familiar with this, you can advertise it to them, and we can get them connected over Slack or the TAC mail list, or any of the other ways that you can reach any of us. So I think given we're doing with, I think given the timing here for the RFI responses, maybe we will skip over the TAC responsibilities and go right into the most recent NIST RFI document. Or do I have Yeah, I do not see a couple people who had made separate comments on the TAC priorities for the year, and they wanted to bring up some topics, but as they're not yet on, I think that's good to audible here to change our flow. So thanks again to.
Carry on. Sorry.
Yep, no, I was just going to say thanks again to Sal and Mark and everybody else who reacted quickly to get 1800-28 resolved earlier this year, as we were just all getting back from vacations. Many of us were anyway. And then the one due today is this 800-226. And the format for this is for everybody replying with comments to indicate some existing part of the doc, make a comment on it, and then provide some suggested text. And so if we scroll through this, we'll see a good bit of contribution already. And we do not have time to do, since I think we only have a few hours left here, we don't have time to do a lot of major writing, but I think that we can address comments that are in this doc, and I think Mike is ready to go with that.
Yeah, if that's okay. So firstly, thank you to everyone who looked and or contributed. Firstly, I think all of the comments made were relevant. I got to the stage where I looked at it and thought, actually, this just needs rewriting. So that's pretty much what I've done with it. And I think it's probably worth just describing briefly some of the reasons I rewrote things and what they mean. So the first thing was the initial text talked about secure enclaves. And this is a term that we have tried to avoid in the CCC for the simple reason that it's specific to it's an Intel term for SGX, really. It's not applicable to all of the other types of technologies. And so therefore, we've championed the use of trusted execution environment to describe what we do. So that's why I led with that. The other thing was that they specify CPUs, and it's not CPUs, it's GPUs as well. And they say security enabled. And this is kind of missing the point. What we're talking about is certain CPUs and GPUs and other hardware processing units can provide these capabilities, which are TEEs. And when we do that, it's called confidential computing. And so that's what I've written there. I talked about isolation, encryption, attestation, and can provide it because not all of them do it the same way. And also talk about attestation is an important thing to bring out there. So the primitive is the TEE. It's provided by a CPU or GPU or other processing unit. And when it's done in this sort of way, it's called confidential computing. And this is something we've hammered out over the last 4 years or so. We can always rediscuss it, but I think it's a useful way to frame what we do and to be consistent about it. You asked the question, Dan, whether I'd managed to harvest it from somebody else. The answer is no. I just rewrote it because this is kind of in my head now, and I've written this thing so many times. But yes, it would be good to keep this for another occasion. I've updated
I feel like we wrote similar text near the end of last year in responding to I can't remember what the NIST document number was, but I'm pretty sure it was a NIST RFI.
Yeah, there's a White House one as well.
Yeah, that's what it was. It was the Office of National Cyber Directorate, I think.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we want to be mindful of as a consortium is that we're always putting forth text that we've all agreed to, and we also can get some efficiency by not having to regenerate the same.
So I wonder whether this is stuff that we should maybe replace some of the FAQs on the website with, because this is kind of being crafted quite carefully. Sal and I can maybe have a look at that. Okay, cool. Yeah, got a thumbs up from Sal. So got the examples in there. And then I actually used one piece of their text, which such platforms promise similar capabilities. We might actually change promise to offer. Maybe we should change that. Let me change that now. I think that's a more positive, isn't it? Where's that? I've lost it now. Okay, offer. There we go. And then I took the text that suggested around implementers being careful, and kept with confidential computing technologies as the text. Is there anything that people A, disagree with, and B, anything we could improve there? I'm really keen that as many people in the TAC as possible kind of internalize the way that we're thinking about this so we can be consistent. Again, I don't mind if we change it, but if we're all coming from the same place, to the extent that our own companies will allow it, then I think that's really positive. And it makes writing this sort of stuff and just copying and pasting easier for everybody.
Mm-hmm. I think we were careful with wording about integrity, or no, confidentiality rather, that it didn't necessarily cover code. It could when we were writing the TAC white paper.
Indeed. And so the word can is in there.
Okay.
I agree. It's careful. It didn't feel like the place to try and explain it in detail, but I 100% agree. I had that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
You have a question from off here?
No, not a question.
Oh.
Excuse me, but a comment for line number 4. It's not only that it is commercially available, we can highlight that it is already used.
Yeah, so I don't think we're looking at using this text. We're looking at using the text that I've rewritten. So if we, do we want to change?
Yeah, the suggested text says these platforms are now commercially available, including in every cloud. Line number 4. And
so yeah, okay. So don't look at that. Look at the text in
the one that you highlighted,
right? So we might want to change that. I wasn't sure whether to. So I've used similar words, but not quite the same, including in all major clouds and in commercially available hardware.
So what I'm trying to say that it's not only available, but also being used. You know, we have customers that are running their workloads in production inside TEs, and we're not the only one that are doing that. There are different products that are doing that today. Some of them, you know, the ones that talk in the different conferences, but we have banks that are using the technology. It's not only available, it's already being leveraged to protect sensitive
data. Okay, I've changed. Have a look at that.
It's a little hard to track changes live.
I see what you did. Yeah.
I wondered about putting something there, and I think this is a good improvement. If everyone else is happy, we should make the point. You're quite right. It's out there. It's not just theoretical. It's actually being used.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
It's like Hank.
Yeah, hi. So this is super tiny net. When you so I actually did not get if the highlighted cell in column H is now new text. I think it is, but I also heard Notion is not, so I didn't get that. If this is new text, we are talking in line 5 with line breaks in cell about isolation, encryption, and attestation. I understand that attestation is perceived as a well understood term. I would have no objections if we were trying to sneak evidence in the phrasing. So we can talk about, okay, attestation doesn't mean the result, but the TE functions give you evidence, because a lot of people
so we
otherwise, you know,
I think maybe to put the word remote attestation is the phrase.
Maybe just say remote attestation evidence, and then you are absolutely clear what this means. because attestation sometimes is misconstrued as endorsements and sometimes is misconstrued as the attestation result, which is definitely not what we're talking about. So yeah.
In the context, so has somebody looked at the existing text, and would that level of specificity make sense for this context?
I'm not sure it does. And also,
I'm not sure either.
It's
there's
not actually
always the conflict that we are confusing what we're talking about. Just highlighting. So isolation is pretty clear. So you get information of isolation, and it's kind of encryption is one of the isolation obfuscation features, sure. And now attestation, and now I would like be cool. I get a policy steering decision. No, you don't. Oh, then I get information about policies here. No, you don't. So that's not what you get. So that's just I'm just being careful here.
Yeah, but if you go on to the next bit, it says implementations employing these techniques are collectively termed confidential computing, and I think that it's how you employ those that is in the detail, right? And I get the question. I don't think we could say that TEs themselves provide attestation. But if we say they provide attestation evidence, then that's not confidential computing, because it's the actual use of attestation that makes it confidential computing. So I don't think it's worth doing it. I absolutely get what you're saying.
Yeah, okay. Just be clear that the audience will understand what the TE can do and not do, and that's fine.
Okay, are we happy as is then, or not?
I think we are opening up a lot of confusion again, because NIST attestation is two conflicting definitions, and
there's more than two.
In this document, yeah, of course, there's two. There are two conflicting definitions in this glossary. One of them is endorsement, the other are called a first or third party attestation.
There are more than two. There are more than two, actually.
No, in the glossary there aren't. In the glossary of NIST, and this is what they will fall back to, there are two.
So we had existing text as part of our white paper. Was that something that you considered when you were rewriting it, or is that something we need to revisit here?
I haven't specifically used that text here, and I do take your point that there are different.
In this context,
there are six definitions of that NIST provides for what attestation are. Page 1881 of my book. But okay, fine.
I'll chime in. I need to drop in a second, but I think that what we want to change in this RFC is less the accuracy and getting into everything that confidential computing is, but rather emphasize the fact that the RFC also already identifies confidential computing as a mean to solve a problem that is not solvable today. It just says that the technology is not mature enough. And this is the thing that I think would be most important to change, so that, after that, people can come and learn about the technology and dive into what does attestation mean. We don't need to explain everything in a section. Sorry for jumping in.
Yeah, nothing. I mean, one final suggestion is if we use these words, how do we feel about changing it to that?
I can't.
So they can provide isolation, encryption, and remote attestation capabilities. Sorry, and implementations, etc. There we go.
More than fine.
Okay, great. Thanks, Hank. I think we're all good then.
Chris has been patiently waiting.
Just two comments. This in this definition here, you have language. Where did it go? Only exposing data during processing, and I just want to call out that that's dangerously close to protecting data in use with exactly the opposite sentiment. I worry that it's going to confuse people.
Let me explain why I used those words. And it was difficult because if we're being lazy, we sometimes say that it's always encrypted except when it's in the processor. But that's not true, because that's not the way that the technology works across all platforms. And so I wasn't sure what better words to use. I'm very interested in having other words.
So let me make my second comment then, which is that I mean, NIST is the kind of place where language details matter a lot. And what we're doing here is proposing on a, on a less than day timescale, a significant change to the standard CCC definition of trusted execution environments and confidential computing. And I worry a little bit about inserting a completely new set of language without.
So which bit do we think is changing it?
Well, Dan just showed a document which contains definitions of confidential computing, and I'm not clear why we're not using exactly that language instead of coming up with new language. So maybe I'm misunderstanding something.
Fine, let's use that. That's fine. I didn't have it in front of me. We should probably use that. What's this from, Dan?
This is from the white paper.
Fine. We should use that. That's fine. I just typed out stuff, but I was editing bits and pieces together, and I should have just copied some of that. Which bit are we suggesting we take?
I don't know exactly.
Define confidential. Yeah, so if we're going to define confidential computing, we should just use the definition that's in this document. And then if you find that there's something that you need to blend together, maybe there's a way you can do that with cutting and pasting text snippets.
Could you put a link to that right in the chat, so I can make the change now?
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
All right. One other point is where we list technologies.
I've added COVE to it.
Thank you. So that's kind of across the board for some other comments. I want to spend just a few more minutes on this doc before moving on. So maybe outside the meeting, Mike can finish up making those changes so that they are either exactly in alignment or as close as possible in alignment to our previously published text. Next comment is by way of Nikolai. And he's updated the references. So there again, we need to add the Cove reference. So do that live here.
So Phil, I've added that bit. If someone wants to add other bits to it. So the suggestion here is that we don't use any of the text other than what's in line in row 2, because otherwise it's going to be a nightmare, right? So if there's something we want to put in, it needs to go into row 2. Sorry.
That looks good to me.
So the other thing, we are opening a possible can of worms here as well, just be aware. In that we've always tried, as the CCC, to avoid listing specific technologies as meeting or not meeting the criteria. And we just list a bunch of them here. And danger Will Robinson. Right, because as soon as we do this, people start coming out and say, why didn't you list technology Y? And that's why we've always said we don't want to do this BIS certification authority, right? Or anything like that. But there is an example in the existing one, right? We could use words like technologies often considered to be TEs include. But we either put everything in or nothing in, and I would lean towards nothing, because as soon as you put everything in, people are going to start saying, why am I not in? I took trust zone out because our definition, we've always said that trust zone allows you to build a TE with a primitives, or might do, but it's not a TE itself. As soon as we start doing that, I don't know, for instance, whether risk COVE is itself a TE or allows you to build one. I'm just not qualified to do so. So my preference would be to remove the list of technologies.
So I think because there's already a list in the document, and it's not our document, we're at least helping them improve it.
Okay.
I don't know if we don't list the technologies, if they will just stick with their existing list, which will be incomplete, or more incomplete than what we would be offering.
So this brings another point, is that we should be serving as a reference for people. There should be some place on the confidential computing website where all such technologies are listed.
No. Sorry. Let me explain why not. This is this is an important conversation we have not frequently, we have it regularly. It's really, really important that we do have it. So if we list, the CCC lists a technology and says it is a TE, that means that companies, members might think that it was had been certified to meet certain criteria, and we are not a certification body. It also would lead other companies who think that what they have is or should be a CE to come after us and say, why haven't you said this? You need to change your model, or explain to us exactly what your certification and classification criteria are, and start picking those apart, which is not what we should be about. We should not be a classification body. We're quite happy for Intel and AMD and ARM and folks to say, we do TEs by the definition of the CCC, but we should not be saying this is in, this is out. It's a really important thing here.
I'm not clear that we need to make a certification statement in order to list a foundational technology that is can be used towards confidential computing aims. But okay. So I take your point. More I was thinking that people want information about, well, I'm interested in confidential computing. What are the platforms that can help me get there? And I don't know that we need to be a certification body to have a list. So maybe just one other comment, which is that if you're going to list things that are supporting Ts, the interest in AI suggests that you should maybe put Hopper in there somehow.
And that's another thing, that this gets bigger and bigger, and I'm not sure whether Hopper officially meets our criteria or not. I've not done the work on it, and this is another reason for not having it at all. And Mark, I'm very happy to have a longer conversation with you and the ARM folks about it, because it's a quite contentious conversation. We probably shouldn't have it here. My suggestion is that we just take it out, because
there is. Sorry, I do want to jump in. I think generally, if we're doing marketing through the antitrust, we are not going to do over specify, do a technical specification on what we're doing is communication. We're not doing that, but this is a very specific audience. This is one of the things that I feel strongly about. I think it would say includes, but is non-exhaustive, right? But the reader of this document is looking for this level and this kind of information, because we've got what they wrote means they've not looked at any of this.
Okay, Nathaniel.
Yeah, I wanted to say that there is something lost by not listing any technologies, which is because that the general sphere of what we're doing becomes very amorphous, and there is a comprehensibility problem. Confidential computing as a whole also has a comprehensibility problem, and I don't want to add to that. So there is an intermediate place that we could take here, which is to say we could have a list of companies who claim to implement the confidential computing definition, right? That clearly identifies that we are not making a judgment to that fact, but it also basically, I'm thinking of this like sort of related to, the IANA sort of specification required, that if there's some company that claims to implement it, they could get on that list, but they would have to claim to implement the definition as defined by the Confidential Computing Consortium. We don't certify it. We don't evaluate those claims, but it is our definition that is what qualifies you to be on that list.
I get it. I'm not sure that fits very well in this document. I mean, I think there's a broader conversation to be had here as well, right? I really want to have some examples in here because I think that it really helps the reader if we do. I don't know how to do that in such a way that we're clear that there are some things we're excluding, right? And this is part of that. There's an elephant in the room here. There are actually two, one which we've talked about before and one which we haven't as much, but and I using words like claimed is, if it's just reads really weirdly in this document, right? And if we just mention the companies, that feels weak because it doesn't help the reader particularly. I don't want to mention the CCC specifically in this document because it feels self-serving. I don't know what to do. I really don't.
Okay, so that's another topic. I guess when I looked through it, I didn't think about getting a CCC mention, and I don't think it would be self-serving if our point is to say that there's a multi-vendor consortium involved in the maturity of this technology. I think that adds credence to it. So I don't know that we have time to generate that text now, but that's something to consider for at least a future document. Alec? Alec is looking for unmute.
Sorry,
perhaps.
yeah, I couldn't find my unmute button there. Just wanted to put a vote in favor for both mentioning the CCC at some future document. I don't think we should shy away from our position as being an authoritative position on what exactly is confidential computing. And the other thing I'd say is I'd vote in favor of including examples rather than leaving them out. I think qualifying statements that say this is a partial list are fine. Last thing I'd like to say is that I do believe that the Hopper chip does provide confidential computing. I've only been tangentially involved in those, but I can probably find out very short order whether or not Hopper does meet the CCC definition of confidential computing. I'm 99% sure that it does. So if we wanted to list an example of technologies that do meet the CCC definition,
does it provide attestation, remote attestation capabilities? That was the only thing I was really sure of.
Yes, I believe it does.
Okay, so how about this? I've used the word relevant because it's fuzzy and doesn't mean anything.
Technologies. Yeah, I'll just let you be the one to edit it. So the word organization appears, organizations in front of technologies. I think that's a typo. Members with relevant organizations, technologies.
Oh, yeah, I can't even see it now. Oh, yeah, okay. Yep.
So I liked the spelled out versions of those names where you've abbreviated them now. I liked but if your goal was to add the leading part of the sentence, I like that. The Confidential Computing Consortium, yada, yada.
Okay. Do we want to really pull it all out? I mean, we can. We've got space, I suppose. Okay.
Yeah. For some of these readers, right, when it's about readability, they've not ever seen the
Okay.
condensed version, so they got to read it.
Okay. I'll edit these in afterwards. If everyone's happy with the rest of it, I'll edit these in later on in the before I send it before you take it off. So.
Yeah, and NVIDIA as a member, we should be able to reach them and ask them for their opinion.
Well, we've got about an hour to do that, so well, a few hours to do. It's a relevant technology, even if it's not a yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm less concerned about like some technical nuance and more if that's actually how they brand it. But
based on my own knowledge, I'd say we're safe to include that in here, and I think that they meet the definition every bit as much as the other technologies.
Okay. I'm just looking at their web pages, and I think yes, indeed, definitely the case. Yes.
Okay. All right. Before we go on to the next step with this document, I just want to do a quick check of whether we will be losing TAC members at the top of the hour. I know Kafir had added something in the priorities document, and often has a conflict in the second hour.
Yeah, I think I have a conflict at 8 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
I have a conflict at past, but not the top of the hour.
Okay, thank you, Nathaniel. Kafir, how much time do you think is warranted to open that discussion?
I'm hoping it's open-ended, right? We don't need to reach any conclusions today. We can start when we're ready, continue later or offline. Okay.
Why don't we try to round this document out in the next 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll get into the priorities and let you open the discussion on that for later.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thanks. All right. Let's make this thing readable again. So
I'm editing the last bits of it.
Thank you. So from Nikolai's comment, I think we're going to say that that row 2 subsumes row 3, and we're not going to send in 2 things. And then somebody has struck out.
Me. That was sweet. Okay. It's basically to say that all of the text I'm putting in is supposed to be subsuming all of the stuff below.
Okay, so you might want to also mark line 1397 in here so that it's clear to the review committee.
In where? Sorry.
So,
well, it says
Nikolai was
starting
specifically
line.
targeting. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Fair enough. So you might not have to do that. All right, scrolling down. Okay, so 1397, 98, same deal.
Oh, I didn't look at this one actually. 1465. Oh, sugar. Hardware enclaves. That's not too bad actually. I think we keep this one actually at 1465.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then line 7 is also subsumed by the earlier comments. And then we also struck the last one as being sort of overly vendor comments. Okay, I think modulo some offline cleanup from.
Well, I've just tried to do that. So if we're happy, I could just remove the struck out text.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll do that right now. Thanks for everyone's help here. This is as you could tell, it becomes tricky much sooner than one expects doing this stuff. So thank you.
Great. So the I think the next document that we'll be looking at is AI, and that's due February 2nd, which will be again before we, I think that's before we meet again.
It is.
Is there any quick guidance to share on how we want to collect feedback for that document?
So I'm happy again to act as the Sal.
I was just gonna say, I'll take a look at it. If it's another standardized, sometimes it's in the standardized format we just did, and sometimes it's a copy and paste. I will set up a template for whichever it is in this case, and I will send that out.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thanks so much for everybody's work on that. I think from what I'm hearing from more and more people is this is one of the most effective things that the consortium can do is respond to these as a consortium.
Agreed. It's really good work, folks. I know it's hard. Appreciate it.
Okay, let's switch over to TAC priorities, and we'll at least get into it a little bit before Kafir has to leave, but I think most of the rest of us will still be on to continue. So last year, we started to frame things up for the board and for ourselves in terms of what we do for projects, what we do for the ecosystem, like the NIST documents that we just reviewed, and then what we do to grow our community, which has typically been things like internships and recruiting people at conferences and so forth. At a top level, I'd like us all to have as much as possible, the same understanding of why we're here. Sometimes when we've got back-to-back meetings, it's a little bit hard to remember, what the purpose of showing up to this one is. And so I thought we could spend a little bit of time just thinking about the statements that I've assembled out of comments from other places. And that's that we're here together because as a community, we think that we can improve the security using confidential computing better than what we could do individually. So I've paraphrased what I have written there. And part of the intent of this is to say it's not just we're working on an arbitrary technology, but we think there's actually something useful about this technology that makes people's lives better.
I think this is good. Should we try and reflect in it or reflect back to it the organizational aims of the CCC? I know they're slightly distinct. That's
a good question, because I know we've got the top level mission that we.
Yeah.
I think it's more or less this slide, and it is a little bit more.
It's more about us, right? Why we're doing it, right? I like that. I think it's really good. Just wonder if there's any words we should be mirroring across them. Maybe not. That's fine as well. Just worth raising the point.
Yeah, let me just put them side by side.
Now, I'd like to see something about open source. in the TAC priorities as well. But that's the only thing I think that feels like it's missing a bit. And I'm aware that there are absolutely members of the consortium who don't explicitly use or are members of open source projects, and I get that, and that's one of the things we live with. But part of what we commit ourselves to as an organization, as a consortium, is that. So that's why I think it's worth thinking about. I don't want to lose sight of it.
Yeah, and I really want to focus on the why, because I think that is at least motivating for me, and I think motivating for people generally. Focusing on the why a little bit more than the what.
For some of us, open source is a why as well. Strongly for me.
So maybe we'll come back to that some more as we go on, but I know we're down to a few minutes for Kafir. So over the overarching why, but then what we're going to do in 2024 is we want to help grow our projects, grow our ecosystem, and grow our community. And so the statement here is, as security experts, we inform security compliance standards and research. So what we were literally just doing a few minutes ago. And Kafir has reflected on that, and I'll let you speak to your own text there, Kafir.
Thank you, Dan. And by the way, thank you so much for preparing the documentation and the objectives. Very great work, and I'm super aligned with this. And by the way, on the open source community and being an open community, I constantly tell my people and my team that we believe that open is better than closed as a core value, and this definitely drives our mission and our work here, at least on my team.
That's great to hear.
Plus one to that. Yeah, so I just wanted to maybe start a discussion on how do we balance security and practicality, right? I think I'm really trying to avoid being a security purist, especially when I engage with customers or engage with partner teams. I don't want to be seen, me personally, the things that I'm building and the things that we as a community sort of building and advocating for. We want to make sure that we give customers sort of a spectrum of options, right? Not only the high-end ultra security, mission impossible security solutions. I worry that sometimes our discussions are sort of over-indexing on security and over-indexing on, say, zero trust. And we all know the high friction and high cost of a true zero trust system. And I'm just trying to see if we can balance that, just getting that, I would say, user empathy in at giving them more practical options to adopt CC.
I think there's absolutely a really important place for pragmatism is a word I use a lot. I absolutely agree.
Yeah, so this is things that have been constantly bugging me, right? How do I avoid being a security purist? How do I bring more customer empathy? I keep thinking that the cost of zero trust is 1 over 0 is infinity, right? And it's becoming sometimes an infinite black hole of things that you need to do if you want to achieve true zero trust. And I'm just trying to balance this when I engage and when I advocate for confidential computing. That's it. I just wanted to share this sort of thought and feedback. I wanted to make sure that we are also, as a community, we also show this empathy to customers and balance security with pragmatism.
If I may add to that, I have been, and I've said it in this forum, but I think it's just contextually appropriate to repeat. I think ultimately we want the technology to get deployed broadly, and how well it gets deployed is a big function or a big factor in that is manageability. So in particular, I've been stressing this with the attestation SIG, basically focusing on the fact that when you put policies on relying parties, and this is just for instance, those policies are probably not going to change very often, if at all. There'll be something like, the requester has to be cleared for highly confidential data and be in Germany. Like, it's literally not going to change for years. But the measurements, the configuration options, etc., they're going to be very, very fluid. And what I've seen on the attestation SIG is they're like, well, attestation's job is to simply certify the measurements and then, push, kick the can down the road. So it's, I think we need to make manageability one of the core tenets, because again, it's going to result in adoption.
I think it's a really interesting discussion. And one of the things I like about this consortium is that even in the technically focused group, we do have these discussions. And I think it's entirely appropriate that as technologists and security experts, we do think about these things. So I'm very glad to be having these conversations here. That doesn't mean there isn't a time to get it, to allow things to be absolutely perfectly right, and to set things up so the technology is as good as possible. That doesn't mean that it's always going to be the way it's going to be deployed in all cases to start with.
There is a great suggestion in the chat to change experts to advocates and or stakeholders. I think that's a good one. Or to include the three.
Yeah, I like those words as well. I also liked Kafir's original practitioner's comment. So the reason that we are able to comment on these with some level of authority or utility is because we are either practitioners or experts, stakeholders. I like that a little bit. I like any of those a little bit better than advocates, because advocates just sounds like I want to assert a position.
I feel that too much of the time I come across as a security pedant, which is going too far in the opposite direction. So anything better than that. Chris, absolutely. Privacy is a huge motivation opportunity for confidential computing. Again, confidential computing is a set of technologies which allow you to do actual things. So confidential computing is of no use on its own unless it's being applied to something. And privacy is absolutely one of the biggest things to which it is applied.
Yeah, I heard an interesting talk recently on somebody explaining their difficulty in selling security and having sort of an aha about it's really more about privacy. So
Chris, sorry, Chris.
I was just going to ask, Chris, are you suggesting that we change the word security here, or just
I was thinking maybe of finding a way to add privacy in, and not to replace it necessarily.
So sometimes when I'm talking about actually taking stuff to market, I talk about the vacuum cleaner problem, in that nobody wants to buy a new vacuum cleaner. You buy it because you have to, because you're told to, or because you bought a new place or something. And security is almost always a vacuum cleaner. We need to find an actual reason for it, something by adding value to make people want to buy it rather than just because they have to. And privacy is absolutely one of those things, or can be.
Yep. Sal?
Yeah, I think there is just one note here. I think there's not a way to put this in here, but we need to be telling the stories of the hypothetical end user that is positively impacted, right? So it's not maybe bringing out the real end users. In this situation, we don't ever want to identify. But I think increasingly, I'm telling the story of the type of data and always being very clear to communicate in the talk or in writing, the type of data. Because people don't get confidential computing, but they understand immediately what would happen if their 23andMe blew up. Right? We need to have those couple of, so I think increasingly it's not actually the end user. That's a bad way to frame it. Think about the types of data that are protected, and also when someone's going to search security around those things, right? Identity, privacy, those kind of things. That's the story. That's the thing. I think it's the data and the types of data. And we can tell that as the identity that's protected, allowing people to understand its aspects of their identity on the web.
Yeah, that's all good. So
There's
let's. No, please.
I think there is a way to tell a story that isn't about a security tax, but more about enabling new kinds of workloads, and privacy preserving computations are one example that's very compelling. But I'm going to put an article in the chat where I tried to tell such a story, and maybe it'll spark some thoughts.
Great. So then sort of concretely what we want to get out of this ecosystem influence is that we address those documents like we just did. I think that's probably clear to people. The second bullet on here is sort of a call out to the attestation SIG, where I think some of the feedback I've heard from members is there's a lot of choices. There's a lot of choose your own adventure with attestation. There's a variety of formats, different patterns for how you might apply it. And so this is a goal for the attestation SIG. And I know we had Thomas on earlier. I don't know if we've lost him now. Oh yeah, it looks like we've lost Thomas, but I don't know if there's anybody on the attestation SIG that is present here. So I know Hank joins somewhat regularly.
Well, I attend fairly frequently. I would say for years that attestation is the Schelling point of confidential computing. Like that's the kind of thing on which everything sort of needs to align. And we may want to talk about attestation SIG as being more than just defining the a menu of choices. Other things that I think are important are, one would be federation of attestation. Because attestation is effective. It's very similar to security token service, right? It is something that two organizations may want to align on, without necessarily agreeing on a common attestation service to use. Maybe I trust your results, you trust my results. What does that look like? Then we have emerging efforts in IETF. SPICE is one, right? Security patterns for internet credentials, because ultimately attestation needs to result in some sort of a credential. And also WMSC, that's the workload identity for multi-system environments, because when, think about it from the point of view of me submitting a data set to a system, to a workload. Do I really care that the load balancer that I'm sending it to is running in a confidential environment? I care about the entirety of the workload that I'm sharing my data with. So when we start thinking about workloads being handled confidentially by systems, that's again something attestation SIG might want to start taking under its charter.
So I think there's a broader conversation around attestation, which needs to happen at the business level as well. And I'm thinking about how we have that conversation, which has overlap with the attestation, the sort of technical side. And I think this is a good conversation to be starting now. frankly.
Great. So I know that many of your colleagues who aren't on this call do attend the attestation one, and so we'll try to loop some of this guidance to them, where I think an outcome is that companies outside the CCC understand attestation, and we might have a little bit more directive text on sort of a blueprint, if you will, or some of these token related concepts that might be more.
Well, we were planning a Wikipedia entry on attestation. Has that gone quiescent? Because I think that would be a good thing to be thinking about again.
I lost track of it, and I think I asked in, I don't know if I asked on the mail list or Slack, but I don't remember seeing a reply.
I want to, if I may, add some point about remote attestation. The way that, you know, everyone here, I believe, understand that confidential computing without attestation is not really secure. You solve the problem of data in use, but you don't solve the problem of how can you trust that the software is indeed running inside the TEE and it's running what the code that you trust. But the challenge that we see with customers, some of them, is that they see confidential computing as a checkbox. Yes, I can take in today's CVM world, even easier than before. I take my workloads, I run it in a confidential VM in any cloud, and I've checked the checkbox of confidential computing. And I can tell you from our experience that there are customers that say this is enough for us, because they are software vendors and they tell us that their customers are good enough with that and are not demanding them to use remote attestation. Now, it's not, they don't see the value or the problem we're not using remote attestation on one side, and again, the other thing is that they are doing business, so they are saying, if our customer is satisfied with just using confidential computing to protect data in use, we are not going to spend more time or money to use remote attestation, and that's a challenge that we need to see how we manage to create more understanding by everyone that confidential computing is not just data in use protection.
So Kafir, I think to that, it's a little bit of a rear view mirror perspective, not to discount it. I'm sure it's very valid. This is actually the sort of the reason why we have the governance SIG. It's it's sort of one way of getting technology adopted is to have regulators demand it. So that's the direction in which we would like to take it, and then what we would like to do is to pave the road to that with easy adoption, so that organizations will be given. By the way, to that, I welcome participation in the governance SIG, even by folks who think, why governance, very much need attestation people in there. So one of the next things we'll be doing, we'll be writing a set of patterns for around confidential computing governance. So let me give you just a few examples to whet your appetite on that. There is a pattern for deploying a software update, especially in a distributed environment, that has to jive with attestation. So this means that it needs to be integrated with your CI/CD pipeline or whatever deployment technology you use. Because in a distributed system, when you roll out an update, you're going to have a new version coexisting with the old version, and they both must be valid. And then eventually you either roll back the update or you remove the vestiges of old. And that needs to happen separately for hardware, and it needs to happen separately for software. That's a pattern. A customer needs to be able to do this, whether they're using whatever system that they have in place. Right, and these are the kinds of last mile fit and finish pieces that unless they are in place, then the cost of adoption becomes super high. So that's one. Another was already what I alluded to is how do you structure attestation policies in such a way to keep your relying parties constant while changing your attestation requirements as it were. And so you go down the line. There is a number of topics that will be addressing. And what I would personally love is to have folks, who have connections, like, working for Microsoft, working for Google, where attestation services are developed, where development tools are created, such that we can harmonize the way this is done, so our customers are not forced to reinvent their own things that will eventually fragment the system and make it very difficult for us to evolve.
Great. Nathaniel.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to something Afir said, which is, I think, very valuable, which is when we're thinking about how we articulate the value proposition of confidential computing in general and attestation in specific, there's a variety of different ways in which you might compute the value of adopting that thing. But in all of the algorithms I've come across to calculate that value, they end up being divided by the cost to implement. And that means that the cost to implementing this feature is in fact the most sensitive variable in the equation, meaning that as the price to implement things like attestation approaches zero, the value drives to infinity. And so what we end up wanting to do is, yes, we want to find ways to be able to articulate what the value is, but I also think that it's incredibly important for us to just simply drive towards that checkbox mentality that, yes, attestation is on, and I don't have to do anything else, and that's integrated into whatever the software flow is that's around that.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to capture that in the note as well. That's great.
So am I okay to speak?
Please.
So I find myself caught between two stools here. One is the pragmatism thing, in that, as Nathaniel says, it's currently difficult and expensive to do attestation. And the other is to sort of Ofir's point, which is that with all my technical hats on, we're quite clear that if you think you're doing confidential computing, but you're not doing attestation, you're not doing confidential computing. And my view is that if any, well, my hardline view is that I would almost want to say to any member who has a service which they call confidential computing, which does not have attestation, then they shouldn't be calling it confidential computing. Now, because we're that hard. If we say about hardware, for instance, it has to be hardware based. Should we be that hard about attestation? It kind of feels like we should, but on the other hand, we don't have business models that make this work yet. And that is why I think we need to have a really big discussion. And I'm planning to do some panels at conferences and stuff, and probably write a white paper about this as well, to discuss how we do this. And it's really, really difficult. And I think this is a big problem for the CCC and for confidential computing adoption over the next 24 months, shall we say, is that we need to nail how this works. Yeah, so that's me.
Thank you. All right, so I see we're going to lose a few people in about 15 minutes here. One other thing that I want to point out is to make sure that, once we're all aligned on this is the best use of our joint time, then I'm going to ask that each of the TAC voting members, not necessarily live here, but I want each of the TAC voting members to be able to take point on one or more of these bullets, so that as a regular cadence in the TAC meetings, we're checking in on these, we're coordinated on these efforts, especially as we see things here that, attestation SIG and GRC SIG have a confluence of work streams on some of these points. So, and then beyond the voting members, one of the great things about this kind of open organization that we have is anybody can contribute. So It's not going to be limited to the voting members, but I want to make sure that at least the voting members are taking a role in leading each of these bullets. So maybe as a quick reaction to that from the voting members that are on, if that sounds amenable to you as part of your role for your company at the CCC.
I think that's very reasonable. I'm all in.
Thank you, Alec. Separately, Lily and Yash, who let me know beforehand that they weren't able to make it to the meeting today. They've sent notes about what they'll be covering with the community area and with some cross-project work. So I appreciate them being proactive on that. And incidentally, that's another helpful thing for voting members for your responsibility. If you're not going to be able to attend a meeting, it's great to have a heads up so we know if we have a subject that intersects your area, how to address that. Any other comments from the voting members on your ability to lead these areas? I think that might now be reduced to Nathaniel and Mark.
Well, I'm not a voting member.
Other Mark.
Other Mark, Mark with C. That's back up to Nathaniel.
Sorry, I heard my name. I had to step away for a moment. What was the question?
So we were just talking about the TAC voting members taking point on one or more of the bullets of these priorities as a part of the responsibilities as being a TAC voting member. And I didn't ask people to sign up for an individual one right now, but just an acknowledgement that that's something that you feel is within your role.
Yeah, I can do that.
Excellent. Okay. So the third point in this ecosystem objective is engaging with academia. And Chris and others had volunteered some thoughts on that during our earlier brainstorming. And I think part of this is building the next generation of practitioners that look to confidential computing for how to solve security problems, as well as continuing to evolve the research to strengthen the technologies that we deliver. The availability of that research also makes it more of a commonplace thing for people outside of the consortium. So Chris, I might ask if there's some other thoughts there to be captured with the academic outreach.
I think that a lot of us are engaging with academia on a regular basis. I'm not sure, however, that they all are as tuned into the work of this group as they could be. If we can help point them at research issues that we think are important, it may help give them industry context to inform their work in a better way. So I think it would be really nice to have a place on the CCC site where people can go and learn about academic projects that are underway. And I feel that it would be really nice if they could request speakers or advisors to their work from this group, and people could volunteer to be part of a speaker or advisor bureau, and basically find some mechanisms to just create awareness that might facilitate collaborations. I think that I don't think a lot is needed there. It's mostly, maybe an opt-in website that whoever manages our website might be able to put together, and maybe a new mailing list or two. So I don't think it's a huge a huge lift, but it could be useful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that also makes me think of our tech talks. One of the things that we've done to make sure that we're thinking not just about policy topics, but about the upcoming evolution of the technology is have regular technical speakers. And our forecast for those for 2024 is entirely empty right now. I've reached out during the latter half of last year to keep that going through different contexts, but I would love assistance getting new thought leaders in.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, we also heard from a research organization or a research, I'm not sure how to phrase it, but there's a group of universities with principal investigators that address confidential computing. And we could probably reach out to them as well. Mm-hmm. Again.
I particularly like the idea of having a list of research topics. And it's something that maybe it could play into the list of work that projects, open source projects, are looking to do, because one may lead the other on occasion.
Great.
By the way, yeah, so I think that it is bidirectional. It's not just feeding academia with research topics, but learning from them what they see as key issues and opportunities.
Yeah.
Which is part of the tech talks. Why would we have them? It's because they have something, they have some fresh thinking. Especially in areas like, what does the system stack need to look like if and when confidential computing becomes truly ubiquitous? What if you were to re-architect your system stack with the assumption of confidential computing? There's huge clean slate work that is going to be motivated as this movement becomes relevant, and we need to start getting ahead of those developments.
Yeah, I think there's also some interesting questions as to if you want to be combining other technologies like maybe fully homomorphic encryption or zero knowledge proofs with confidential computing. What properties do you gain? What do you lose? What are the opportunities for work there? I'm sure there's really good academic work to be done there.
Mm-hmm. Well, another area touching on privacy is what some people call data use controls, and attaching access controls and privileges to your data, and enforcing those throughout the chain of processing, which you can only do if you have confidential computing. And so this is an example of new workloads that are enabled if you have confidential computing under the hood. So there's research on that at Berkeley, and there's research on new system stack at Imperial in London. And I think this community would be invigorated by hearing from them.
Great. Okay, so this has been a good set of discussion, particularly around this middle objective. I don't want to overextend our time on this, but let me just touch real quickly on the first and the third. So open source organization, we do projects. We've gotten a bunch of new projects in, which is great. We want to be able to help address the level of security and the general quality of those projects. So that's the first bullet. We'll talk more about this next time. This is the project mentoring role. We want to make sure that they're adopted, so people don't really care about a project that nobody's using. And we want to address this opportunity that led to the creation of the most recent Linux kernel SIG that we have. And then very closely to building the open source projects is building the communities around them. We want to stick to our culture of inclusivity, make sure that we are able to reach out to find new contributors in new places that are otherwise not represented at the CCC. And Lily and Yash are working on things specifically with mentoring. So one of the most expensive, but maybe one of the most worthwhile things for our projects is to spend time bringing up a new contributor through an internship by mentoring them. And so Yash will be able to speak about that in an upcoming meeting. So I think we'll wind the topic up here, but thanks for inputs. Continue to think about this why statement. I remember off the top of my head, we want to reflect the openness or the open source aspect in here. So if you've got other thoughts, I think that's good to have those incorporated as well.
I do have one, which I do not know how to reflect anywhere, but it's about gaps. So this is what I mean. Conventional computing completes what I call the trifecta: data in use, data trust, data in transit. But they cannot be thought of as being separate from each other. I need to be able to send data to be processed in a unit without a loss of confidentiality or integrity anywhere, right? Just because it's secure in parts of the journey doesn't actually complete the objective. So I think ultimately what we want is because data in transit is now ubiquitous and secure, and we understand it, and we also know how long it took. It took decades. Similarly with data trust, we now have Linux support, Windows support, every cloud supports, it's all done, right? But it's like what we're really doing is we're putting the final block, and it needs to be put in a way that leaves no gaps, and then we're done.
Yeah, I like that, and it really holds to, I think, how we've started to insert into the documents that are out there, in that they usually say something about data at rest and data in motion, and it's a natural place for us to plug that gap. I'm totally open to ideas about how to word that into what we're doing at this level or at the next level down.
There is this realization that the confidential computing does not automatically protect communication channels outside of the T. That's something that needs to be built in. As a result, it cannot be an afterthought.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to keep us moving along for the agenda, as we've got, we're into our last quarter of the meeting. We brought a bunch.
I just, if I may then.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ophir.
I'm sorry that I'm nagging again about remote attestation, but I think that when we are keeping on saying that confidential computing closes the last medium of data in at rest, data in transit, and data in use, I think that we should also talk about remote attestation. We need to find a catchy way to mention that, but it's not only data in use. The fact that remote attestation creates that workload identity in a way that did not exist before and cannot be solved only by software. I think that that's a huge value of confidential computing. And even, every time that you start the meeting every Thursday and you show the statement of introducing the solution for data in use, I think that we should add something about, we don't need to solve the what now, but we should add the power of remote attestation or hardware-backed software identity, I'll call it.
I want to. I hate to further pile on to this topic, but even attestation, remote attestation, is just a primitive, and used atomically, it doesn't get you very far. And so in the certifier project, we use the term certification to refer to full policy evaluation based on attestation. And I feel like without that, you can never really secure a distributed system. So I think there may even be a term beyond attestation that's worth introducing and exploring.
You're right, it's a primitive. There's probably several things we should be looking on top of it. Because identity, right? You can use identity, you can use attestation token with identity. So that's another thing you can build from the primitive.
Yeah, when you actually think about zero trust actually is more than confidential computing. It's you could simply attest, the firmware of your device and whatever the state the software is in, and it's not a requirement that it keeps the confidentiality of the data that goes through it. But zero trust is simply about being able to verify every endpoint in your system, and that is where we have a very strong presence there. And also, I would like to stress that we need to move towards code identity as the main primitive, because hardware is sort of just a medium through which code identity needs to be established and protected, if you think about it. But what we really care about is that it is the code that is properly vetted, that it does what it's supposed to do, that it cannot be tampered with, which may also itself be protected, so you don't know what the code does, which may also protect data that the code is operating on. But the existing mechanisms exist because of the existing limitations, which we're now removing.
Well said.
All right, Hank, bring us home on this. And you're muted.
Multiple mute buttons. Muted on my headset. So multiple items. Let me try to recapture that. So yeah. So I think I want to pick up a few quotes, and let's start with the youngest. Assessing that a system does what it is intended to do and nothing else. So software is intended and understood is running and doing the things. That's remote attestation country. So I heard certification is required. Remote attestation is just one primitive. Yes, of course, definitely, because what the code actually does, you just know which code is running. Is the code good or bad? Is totally outside of remote attestation. It's just the code that you selected to run, and it's running. So if it's broken, well, that certification code review kicks in. So of course these, I think, are orthogonal things, and we're really careful to distinguish them and say, for a good confidential assurance, you need multiple items, and there are primitives and other things working together here. So certification, of course, is one thing that you could say. The mechanism for remote is fine, and also the code that you use is fine. Two very different types of certification here, all playing together. So I think I'll just stop here, trying to bring this home and not monologuing too much. I think it's great to find these primitives and highlight them, but you also have to be precise where and what is important for which feature.
Great. That's a good concluding statement. All right, so we will pivot out of our objectives looking at projects as the natural way for me to segue into the onboarding of the new projects. If I get this window out of the way from Zoom. We have VertiE, which we brought on in the summer, but it kind of took a while to get through the last stages. SPDM-RS, the Rust implementation of one of the protocols necessary to bring things like GPUs into the trust boundary, and then the certifier framework. These are all coming online, and for some of them, we have mentors from the TAC, and for some of them, we do not. Also, for these projects, we want to encourage them to make use of the blog and the webinar capabilities that we have to help promote the projects out in the ecosystem. And let's see here if we can at least address one aspect of these. There's our project list. So Alec volunteered for Coconut as we brought that on. Coconut's still coming through the formal phases that the three above it have already completed. So we do need support for VerTE, Rust SPDM, and the certifier framework. We are a little bit down on participation by this point in the meeting. So I don't know that I'm going to effectively ask for mentors at this point, but go ahead, Chris.
Actually, I wanted to, let's see, I think it's a question about onboarding projects and fully leveraging the CCC. So speaking from a certifier framework point of view, what we see as important next steps is to start having sort of, bi-weekly or monthly meetings, technical meetings with contributors in the community that's interested in advancing it or using it. And the question arose like, oh, can the CCC provide any support for program managing those meetings and putting together a mailing list, doing all of that kind of stuff, and would love any thoughts on that.
So Chris has his hand up. Is that relevant, Chris, or
that was Chris?
That was me.
It's Chris Hawkins. Okay.
Right.
So I think it depends whether this is kind of set up or longer term. Certainly, we have the Linux Foundation has capabilities that we can pay for, which the TAC might decide to devote some money to in particular cases. Sal is around and absolutely able to help with some of that stuff, but I suspect not as a long-term sort of managing maintenance, but more the setup and helping things go. That's very much what Sal, I think, is planning to be doing around open source projects as they're onboarded. So I think the question partly is about scope and also partly about time.
Yeah, I think there is some setup. You'd like to have a place on the CCC website that says, okay, we have meetings. It's basically like this forum has, right? Calendar invite. There's Zoom meetings. There's a mailing list people can add or remove to. In some ideal world, somebody could help even poll for topics. Put together the agenda and sort of manage the meeting as well. That might be more than CCC wants to bite off, but I suspect that there are projects that would love that if it were available.
And I think that is absolutely one of the things that we want to be making part of the package, so that it's easy for organizations and companies to decide that this would be a good home. The consortium would be a good home for open source projects like this. And that's absolutely part of the reason that Sal has joined the team, is to help make that happen.
Yep. And let me give you some other very specific feedback or ideas. So the attestation SIG, they've got a running agenda doc, and this looks a lot like, and it's modeled from other open source organizations that that I've been a part of. And so the link for that is in there. And so, like, I know CNCF Confidential Containers, they also have a document like this. And so all the connection info is up at the top, and then you end up having like one thing to send out that has the agenda and a running set of minutes. And then we also, for the attestation SIG, record the meetings. So somebody has to go to the work of kind of curating that list of links. But at least for an initial bootstrapping, just a document like this does a lot. And then we should certainly be able to help with mailing list, and I'm trying to think if there was anything else, like a Zoom connection. That's all something that is within budget and parameters. So good question, Chris. And I think part of the benefit of being on the TAC call is we're happy to help projects, and the best way we can help them is when they actually have questions that we can help address.
And there's a benefits to members section on the website. We should have the same for projects. We should create a
Yeah, so that's thanks for the reminder on that, Mike. So yeah, we have this projects area that both has how to offer a new project as well as the list of current projects. And we have connector buttons. And it looks like these are uniformly GitHub links and maybe a project website. So I don't know if we have a specific benefit about creating a project website.
I don't think we do, or joining. And I think that's something that we might think about as well. Why not?
Yeah. So we need to get a lot of this content is really important to get out. Because I think in explaining, it's not just there's templates and documents. Getting a project sort of onboarded into CC is not that hard. It's about 2 days of work if they answer their GitHub commits. But the other stuff around this, I think what's really, really important is that I do want to hold their hand for the first 3 months or so when we're bringing them on board. They need to know all of the benefits. They need to be suggesting anything that they need extra support for. But I also think I do like the statement that was made before. I have at one time managed 114 developer teams, but that was more than a full-time job. I can act as an IC. I can go in and individually contribute, but I cannot manage them. That's a limitation.
That works. So it'd be great if we captured somewhere in the minutes an action item for thinking about creating a website as one of the benefits, because I don't think we have that now. I think that actually, now that I think about it a little bit more, so Grameen revamped a website that they had created, or they asked to revamp that, and we decided that that was a good like level 2 benefit for our project progression area. So we should think through whether just getting an initial one is like just a basic thing that we want to provide. Okay. I think that brings us to the end of the planned agenda for today, with the exception of setting up for the next meeting. So let's flip down to that slide in the last chunk of time here. I'll go in and fill in the old business, of course. New topics that people want to go over in the next session. We will be past the submission point for the NIST AI document, so I don't know that there will be discussion about that, but kind of throw that out there as food for thought. So I believe it's next session that that Yash will be going over the mentorship processes that we have. And we also didn't fully go through the project objectives, so I expect to go over one or both of those next meeting. We do not have a tech talk lined up. So again, if you've got somebody doing some interesting academic research, new project coming out in your company, an interesting open source project. Those are all good candidates. Last time, I think we talked about maybe Keystone was due to come in, but then recognized that the table that we had was out of date. So Lily arranged with them to come in March. So we might want to check in with, looks like Gramming. And I don't think we have Eric Voigt on. So Sal, as always, let me know if I'm starting to overload with tasks, since I'm so excited to have you on. But Gramming might be due for their annual review, and OE SDK would be the next one after that. Or maybe that's something that Ben was going to be tracking, because he was helping clean up this table.
Okay, so it's Gramming, and which one is the other one that's coming up?
The Open
OE
Enclave SDK.
That's good. That's extra leverage for me to use when I reach out to them to change things. Thank you.
Excellent.
I'd be particularly interested in hearing.
Yeah, let me just close that thought, Chris, real quick. So yeah, looking at this, if this date is correct, then we actually need to hear from Veracruz ahead of those. Chris, what were you about to say?
Yeah, for Gramming, I'd be particularly interested in understanding what directions they're taking on supporting or being useful in the context of confidential VMs like TDX and SNP. It'd be a great topic to hear from.
Yes, and I know they've got news there, and I will not upstage them with that. I'll let them give that news. So let's pencil in Veracruz here. Any other topics for next session? So I need to do that. All right, well, with that, thanks for all the great engagement today. I think this was a super productive meeting. I know I'm energized by having a clear set of agreed upon priorities and objectives and all the discussion that we had about that. So thanks for that, everyone. Good job.
Thank you very much, T, for leading it, Dan. Great work. Thank you so much. See you folks.
All right, bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.